Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today for the webinar Agile Strategy to Overcome Patient Recruitment Hurdle in Europe. My name is Mathieu Boutemi. I will be the animator for this webinar. Just to introduce myself, I am the Public Affairs Manager at France Biotech and also the coordinator of the Clinical Trial Working Group at France Biotech. I will say a few words about France Biotech, but first of all, I propose you to introduce you to our two special guests today. Steve Novak. Steve Novak, I will tell you your title. You're the Senior Director, Global Clinical Operation at Citeline, and Morgan Sellars, EMA Patient Engagement and Recruitment Lead at Citeline. Maybe each of you could introduce yourself, tell about your backgrounds, and
Shall I go first, Steve?
Oh.
Sure, very, very briefly. Thank you, Morgan, and thank you, Mathieu. Steve Novak, again, I lead a group of esteemed clinicians at Citeline, and our position is to work very closely with healthcare providers around the world to identify patients that are very well suited based on inclusion and exclusion criteria for various studies, phase 1 through phase 4 globally. And we have a group of folks who actually have experience in multiple indications that can help look at critical clinical trial design, the protocol, how we can find that best patient from these different practices around the world that can help accelerate trials and offer an advantage over the typical standard of care and give it that alternative opportunity to these patients. So I'm very fortunate to lead that group, and they're absolutely incredible in what they do. And with that being said, you'll hear more about that particular service offering, and I'd like to turn it over to Morgan.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So my name is Morgan Sellars. I'm the Patient Engagement and Recruitment Lead at Citeline Connect. So essentially working with sponsors to help them avoid trial delays by introducing their clinical trial sites to new patient pools. I've been working at Citeline for about 6 years. First 4 years were more working with feasibility teams to help them design successful studies. And the last 2 and a bit years have been more aligned to actually patient engagement and recruitment strategies. But yeah, we're looking forward to the session today. Hopefully that's a good enough introduction, Mathieu.
Yeah, so as I said, I will tell a few words about France Biotech, which is an independent association founded in 1997. The aim of the association was to gather all innovating healthcare companies from France and their expert partner. And it's quite successful because today we have more than 550 members. What is interesting to see is the important growth over the year. So by the end of 2018, we had less than 200 members. And today, as I said, it gets multiplied by almost 3 with more than 550 members. The representation is mostly represented by biotech companies, which is about 60% of our members, but we are progressively opening our arms to other sectors, such as medtech and e-health solution. And so we've got 60% biotech, and I will say 20% medtech and 20% e-health solution. And this good representativeness of the health innovation permits us to have privileged interaction with public decision maker and public authorities in France. And these interactions are supplied by committees and working group inside France Biotech, which addressing all the different issues of innovating health company. We've got a working group on human resources, financial aspects, market access, but also clinical trials. And in this working group, which is quite dynamic because we got a little bit less than 100 people working on it. We are addressing different subjects. We are paying attention, for example, to the new European regulation. We are trying to write a recommendation in order to make France more attractive regarding clinical trials. But also we are paying attention to specific topic, such as the one we are going to see today in this webinar. So I will give you the word, Steve and Morgan. Stage is yours. Maybe just to for the people who are watching it, you've got below your screen a box question and box chat. So feel free to ask your question, and we'll have a look on it for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. But Steve, Morgan, let's go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Mathieu.
Thank you, Mathieu.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks everyone for taking the time to come and listen to this discussion today. I think it's a really important issue, and it's a challenge that not just pharma companies in Europe and France are dealing with, but all over the world around clinical trial recruitment. So hopefully today we're going to discuss some strategies to help overcome recruitment hurdles, but specifically in Europe, because we know the regulatory and legal landscape is very different to other parts of the world. In regards to an agenda, we've obviously gone through the opening remarks. I'll start off with a little bit of background in regards to our current relationship with France Biotech. It's been a really fruitful one over the last couple of years. And then we'll dig a little bit deeper into some of the existing challenges within the space, and then talk about some of the solutions Citeline Connect can deliver as an organization. So first of all, just to give Mathieu and Hugo some credit for setting all this up. Thank you very much, guys. In regards to Citeline, as a little bit of an overview, we're the world's largest provider of software, services, data, and business intelligence. We were recently acquired by a company called Norstella. We work closely with other brands within that group. You may have come across a couple of them, Evaluate, MMIT, Pangola, and the Debon Group. But in regards to the relationship we have specifically with France Biotech, not only have we done webinars like this one, back in 2021, we did a disclosure demonstration or webinar around the new CETIS integration within Europe. And we were just talking before the start of the call, we've been attending and sponsoring a lot of the France Biotech events. So it's a really great collaboration. And we're really hopeful that we'll work a lot more closely together in the years to come and deliver lots more webinars like this on a multitude of different topics. So I think in regards to starting the discussion today, it's important to understand the current landscape. So within the last few years, we've seen the European region deliver some substantial changes around a couple of key topics. First, in regards to collaboration, we've seen EMA guidance encouraging sponsors to engage with technologies and vendors that better engage patients. So there's actually the ruling body saying this is something that they want to see sponsors doing more often. And obviously in regards to transparency and the CETIS integration or development, EMA has put a really clear marker out there that they want to see pharma companies within Europe, but also obviously within France, specifically for today's call, more clearly be transparent around the clinical trials they're running and providing options for patients to actually get involved in that clinical research. I think it would be remiss for me to not mention how much more complex clinical trials have become over the last 20 years. I'm sure anybody who's planning or implementing or working around clinical trials can see this. I mean, one of the key statistics we've seen is that since 2003, there has been a 6% every year-on-year increase of the number of clinical trial endpoints within each study. And what we all know on the ground when we're running these clinical trials is it makes it harder and harder to find patients, keep them on board because the treatment paradigms are a little bit more complex. But then also, it's very important that we address this and are aware of this challenge. And finally, digital innovation is something that is becoming more and more apparent throughout the clinical trials we've been working on. And one of the clear indications of that was last year, 4% of clinical trials in Europe actually had a decentralized element within the clinical trial protocol. I think one big contrast, if you look at the US in comparison to that, was 14% of US clinical trials had a decentralized element. So I think there's some disparities there. And once again, the decentralized elements can very often deliver better options for patients. Despite all of these kind of changes within the kind of the new initiatives delivered by the EMA and trial complexity changes, very often with the sponsors we speak with, me and Steve, every day, we're relying on the same sorts of solutions to solve problems we had 15, 20 years ago. And those problems are pretty simple. It's very much, we're relying too much on sites and PIs to recruit a high percentage of their eligible patient pool at a given site. And we all know the challenges around bandwidth at clinical trial sites in regards to keeping staff, and also just the number of clinical trials that might be ongoing at any given site. Also, and this is something I've found with a lot of the clients we work with in Europe, is a real heavy reliance on the CROs to be the company that delivers the patient engagement strategy. And very often the data delivered from that patient engagement strategy isn't something that's made regularly available to the sponsor. And I think as we move forward, the manner in which we communicate to physicians around our clinical trials, the manner in which we talk to patients around our clinical trials, should be something that's really managed and owned by the sponsor, obviously done in a compliant GDPR and HIPAA way. And then finally, and this is something I've heard multiple times on calls this week with people, is we still kind of expect, if I'm a patient suffering from non-small cell lung cancer, for example, we expect patients to be proactively looking for clinical trials at their site, maybe glancing a poster in a doctor's office. We know from the results in regards to how well we recruit on clinical trials, this is not the case. So we need to implement some new technologies and some new approaches to try and make these patients aware, or even their treating physician aware, of the clinical research you guys are conducting, both at the site you're recruiting at and at nearby clinical trial sites or within patient communities near to the site in which you're looking to recruit, to avoid significant clinical trial delays. Steve, do you want to maybe talk through some of the, I guess, challenges that have arose from this historic approach?
Absolutely, because using some of these outdated methods that Morgan's been talking about has really enlightened us to understand what the environment's really all about. Historically, we look at maybe 50% of the general public would even be willing to participate in a clinical trial. And out of that, you think about 11% of the population of these folks who could benefit from a clinical trial are even confident they could find a trial. This is one of the issues we've been finding, that doctors and their patients in these different areas globally, not only nationally, aren't aware of clinical trials unless someone has mentioned it to them, a patient has brought it to their attention, or they've actively sought out a clinical trial. And then you look at 0.2% of those physicians in the field will actually refer their patients to a study. Why? Why, when these clinical trials could offer an alternative treatment to the current standard of care that could technically and potentially be life-saving and life-sparing? And then finally, only 3% of those eligible patients actually join a trial. That's a huge population that we can reach into and bring out of that population and put into these cutting-edge clinical trials. Next slide, please. So as you can see, that the patient journey has actually been very, very difficult. Look how complicated it could be for a patient that's trying to navigate the environment to find out, is there a clinical trial out there for me that I could benefit from? So we're missing a lot of opportunities to find these patients and match them to the correct trial. Next slide, please. And then we find too that the sites can't recruit enough on their own. Basically, sites can't recruit enough of their own existing patient pool. If you look at these numbers, you're going to find that typically PIs are usually going to max out at about 6% of their accrual targets, which means that as we go down this funnel and we only get 3% of patients successfully enrolled in a trial, and then the site has to wait for new patients to come to a site, well, let's hope they show up. And then they have to maybe open new sites because they're not getting those sites filled with patients in other areas. And then they have to seek help. They have to extend their timelines. Then that increases cost. The actual service offerings that we're proposing today that we're actively engaged in will create what we call a critical path that saves time and money by matching those proper patients through HCPs, those healthcare providers, collectively in a collegial team to bring qualified patients to studies that will actually successfully screen, enroll, but most importantly, complete. We need to get the completers in this study. And that begins at the front end by getting the right patient at the right time on the right study. Next slide, please. So basically, what we need to do is ensure we don't fall into a rescue mode. That's what we're here to prevent. I've actually been involved in several rescue studies at our end where we've had one client that actually said, "Thank you. Your team has moved mountains for us. We met a recruitment goal and we're able to save the study." Let's prevent those extended timelines. Let's prevent that lost money. And let's ensure that that trial is not terminated before it has a fair shot at success. Morgan?
Yeah, sure. So I think hopefully that was clear for everyone, and we're more than welcome to discuss some of those data points at the end of the call if there's any questions. But from the discussions we have with people, it's really clear that those challenges are ever present in everyone's day-to-day work. But instead of focusing on the challenges at the moment, I think it's more important that we talk about some of the solutions that Citeline can deliver to help overcome some of these challenges. So the main way we would suggest ensuring that that rescue mode doesn't happen is proactively addressing risk, and requires innovative, reliable and agile solutions that engage both HCPs and patients. So that critical mass point, that 60% number that Steve just spoke about, doesn't happen because that clinical trial site is being introduced to new patient pools. And the way in which we do that, simplistically, is two ways. We have two types of campaign. We deliver campaigns to opted-in HCPs, leveraging real-world data to target specific specialities and physicians with specific patient pools, and also our recruitment collective, which allows organizations, sponsors to speak with patients in a compliant manner through many different vendors and different approaches. But we're going to add a little bit more detail to those campaigns in a second. But Steve, do you want to just talk through the opt-in HCP route first?
Absolutely. Thank you, Morgan. Within our very exclusive and proprietary database, we have over 1.7 million verified healthcare providers. Majority of those are doctors. A lot of those can also be nurse practitioners and PAs. But these particular doctors, we know, have been pre-screened to verify their credentials, in particular, their expertise in their specialty. And within this community, we have actually 25 different groups of physicians that can collaborate within their own specialties. And then one of the things that we're primarily concerned about, of course, is privacy and security. Very concerned about GDPR, very concerned about HIPAA, and very concerned about our Privacy Act also within the United States. So this database is something that we draw from to find these doctors that can actually execute, not only become aware of the trial themselves so they can refer our trials to other doctors, but they can also screen their patients internally to say, I have a patient that I know very, very well that would benefit from this trial. And it also gives that same physician the opportunity to even offer their sites and become a principal investigator themselves for the study. Next slide, please. And the way we do this, we have a very unique system. We have a digital system in which we can reach out to key doctors that we identify within our database, and we create an awareness campaign. We reach out to doctors within very specified areas that we identify with the sponsor to say, for example, we have 10 sites. Let's go 100 miles around that particular site and find every single HCP that has touched that specialty, that indication, and may have the patient population. Then that doctor, through digital means, will actually indicate they're interested in learning more about the study. That's where our clinicians come in. That's where we actually have the opportunity to have our clinician have a one-on-one connection with that doctor. And then they discuss the protocol, they discuss the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and ensure that we can actually identify those qualified patients. And then finally, through this process, our clinical research managers can help provide that HCP, that healthcare provider, with the resources necessary to understand more about the trial, identify potential patients within their practice or elsewhere, and then to connect that referral with the closest site. It's a beautiful process. And through this process, we found that we can really find those patients and those doctors that are the best fit for that very particular clinical trial. Morgan?
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. So I think in regards to the HCP approach, obviously it's fantastic to be able to speak to physicians with confirmed patient counts in close proximity to your sites. But what we're finding, and this has really come back off the back of the COVID-19 pandemic, is there's an increased awareness among patients and the everyday person on the street that there are clinical trials out there and there's options to enroll in clinical research. I'm sure many of the people on the call have maybe reviewed or looked at utilizing recruitment vendors to maybe help engaging patients around your clinical trial. But there's a big challenge in doing that. And I'm sure all of you have put out RFPs before and had maybe 10 responses back in regards to different organizations that might be able to deliver patient recruitment support. Now, the process of actually onboarding those vendors, the RFP process, the executing the contracts, the doing the MSAs, some of the MSAs we have to do in Europe are extremely extensive. It's an extremely huge amount of time to onboard that vendor. And if you're onboarding maybe one or two vendors for a specific study, one of the key things we've found out when we've been brought into studies on rescue mode is it's very hard to understand whether that outreach mechanism to a specific patient segment will actually work live when the study's actually started. And when you only select one vendor or two vendors, maybe depending on the geographic reach, if 6 months into the study that approach hasn't worked, that's when big problems happen. That's when the delays are caused. So maybe, and we sometimes get brought in rescue mode, that's when you have to go and look at more vendors. And then once again, you've got to go through the same process you went through before. Now, what we've tried to do at Citeline Connect is create a different type of model. Before I talk about the model, because I always get asked this by any of the French clients we speak to, is, do you recruit in France and do you have coverage in France? The answer is yes. All of the partners you can see on the screen, so Alpine Media, 83 Bar, European Lung Foundation, MedAnswers Move Up, all deliver our campaigns in Europe. But what we've created through the Recruitment Collective, it says 90 plus there, but it's now 96 organizations, is an ability for pharma companies to not have to select or guess or forecast what the best approach might be to recruiting patients. And the way we've been able to do this is we've created a Recruitment Collective marketplace whereby multiple organizations will be able to look at the requirements of your study, so where you're recruiting, the type of patients you're looking for, the treatment paradigm, and then activate if they think they can deliver on this study. And the key thing with this approach, and procurement people love it when we talk about this, is these organizations are only ever remunerated for the awareness they drive within their communities when they get a patient to go to a study-specific website, answer the pre-screening questions correctly, and I'll talk about this flow in a second, and book an on-site visit. So what we're essentially allowing our pharma clients to do is leverage multiple outreach mechanisms. So think about the outreach mechanism of a patient advocacy group or a pharmacy. We've started working recently with Walgreens in Europe. So they have boots in the UK, for example, or a digital marketing organization or a patient engagement company. All of these organizations have very different mechanisms to speak to patients and make them aware of your clinical trial. By working through Citeline Connect, instead of having to go through the RFP process and pick one approach, we allow you to leverage all of these different approaches simultaneously and only ever paying or being invoiced for the successful visit of that qualified patient. And let me just talk a little bit through the qualification process. So let's say I mentioned non-small cell lung cancer before. Let's say it's a non-small cell lung cancer trial again. So what we would do is a PFA, so a pre-feasibility assessment. We will go to our partners and say, hey guys, we've got this non-small cell lung cancer clinical trial coming down the road potentially. It's in France, Germany, UK, and the US, for example. We'll ask them, would they be able to deliver this specific segment of patients for this clinical trial? Those patients will then activate on the study. Now, what that means, and you can see it just with the kind of the little person, the first bubble on the screen, is they will all be sending and raising awareness within their own communities and diverting patients to a specific study microsite. So these study microsites are extremely important, not only for the campaigns we deliver, but also for the campaigns your sites will look to deliver within their own patient pools. The study microsites we implement are there to ensure that patients can understand what is actually going to happen within a clinical trial in language they understand. So always in local language, but written not for a clinician or a pharma employee like you might see on a ct.gov record, but written so that a patient can understand, okay, I need to be at the site 4 times a month, or this MRI is going to happen, or whatever procedures might need to happen. Educating those patients as early as possible is a huge, delivers huge increases in patient retention. You don't want patients not understanding exactly what they're getting themselves into when they've actually started engaging with one of your clinical trial sites. The next step we deliver off these websites is the ability for a patient to start an online screening process. The reason we do this is because we want these websites to be sticky. A bad way to describe it, but engaging might be another word. So a patient within the web page will be able to click a button that says maybe pre-screen now or check eligibility. Now, we would implement usually a 5 to 10 question questionnaire, depending on the inclusion-exclusion criteria of the study. And essentially what we want to do within these questions is deliver questions that 1, a patient can answer, but 2, save bandwidth at your clinical trial sites. Because we don't want patients going to clinical trial sites or calling up clinical trial sites if they will not be able to enroll in this clinical trial. So once the patient has gone through those questions and we've ensured they don't have any exclusionary comorbidities or exclusionary previous treatments, the patient will then put in their zip code or postcode or wherever they live, and they will then be connected to their closest clinical trial site. The site will receive a alert saying, and it's the best way for me to describe this is a ding in their email box saying you have an incoming patient. The site can then accept that patient, and what we also look to deliver is scheduling technology. Because what we don't want, because we talked about this before in regards to site resources, we know they're stretched thin at the moment in regards to employees at sites and the number of studies that they're having to run. We don't want patients calling up the site and going, can I come for my on-site visit on Friday at 2 o'clock? And then the site going, no, we can't do 2. Can you do Wednesday at 3? Because that back and forth wastes time and resources. So through the scheduling technology, what we do is when we onboard the clinical trial sites through our technology, we ask them specifically, how many on-site screening visits can you do this month for this specific clinical trial? Now, some might say 10 or 200, depending on the tests required for that on-site visit. But what the site will outline to us is which periods during their work week would it be best for the patient to come for that on-site visit. So it's all about managing the bandwidth of those clinical trial sites. And one of the key things for the patient is the majority of studies we're working on, and you guys are delivering and planning at the moment, is people are still often at work. They have commitments in terms of children, all these sorts of different commitments. By implementing this patient scheduler, it allows the patient to select a time for them to come to the site, which is aligned with their day-to-day lifestyle. So maybe when they drop the kids off at school, they can come into the site and have their on-site screening visit. So it's really important for us to be patient-centric in that approach and make it as easy as possible to get a patient from online interest and starting the screening process to an on-site visit. The final bit, just to kind of sum up the current approach and the current status quo with the majority of studies and the approach we're looking to deliver, is I imagine many of you will be maybe working with recruitment vendors. You maybe select one or two, or maybe you rely wholeheartedly on the CRO. As I mentioned before, this is a risky approach because we don't always know how patients are going to react to certain outreach mechanisms. So through Citeline Connect, what we allow our partners to do is work with multiple vendors, as I mentioned before, maybe the European Lung Foundation or or Blue Modo Media or a Clamson's Pharmacy or whatever it might be, to raise awareness within patient communities. And also, as Steve mentioned earlier on, who are those patients treating physicians in close proximity to your clinical trial sites? We know within many clinical trials, the majority of patients will not be at your clinical trial site. They may be at a community hospital 50 miles down the road. What we're going to help to do is raise awareness within those physician communities that there is a new treatment option for their patients. And we'll provide the legwork and resources to get them from that center to your clinical trial site. The next aspect is educate. We know that patients are terrified of ct.gov pages or EduCT. What we need to do is make patients aware of these clinical trials through the mechanisms I've just talked about, but also speak to them in language they understand. We all know that sometimes if you're spoken to by a doctor, you may not take all of the information in. We know if you're reading, if you get a leaflet from a doctor, that leaflet usually goes in the washing machine. So it's all about providing a destination for patients to learn about the clinical trial. And then engaging. When somebody is interested in a clinical trial, it is imperative that they have the ability to engage with the clinical trial when that interest is at its optimum. And it will be at its optimum when they are reading about the clinical trial and they see the fact that how many times they need to be at the site. They see the fact that they may get reimbursed for travel or overnight stays. These are the key things that patients care about, and implementing the screening and the pre-screen now or check eligibility now button allows that patient to start engaging with the clinical trial in a really low barrier environment. And then enroll, extremely important. So one of the key things we see within the industry is you may get lots of people visiting a website, learning about the study, maybe even starting pre-screening. You see issues when patients can't automatically schedule an appointment at the clinical trial site if they have gone through all the prerequisite screening questions. Our enrollment scheduling technology allows that patient to have a mutually agreed appointment in their diary and in the site's diary to start that on-site screening process. The fact we married that up is giving huge time saving and bandwidth savings to clinical trial sites, which we need to protect, but also it's delivering fantastic outcomes for patients. Patients don't need to worry about will I need to drop the kids off at my grandparents, at my parents to look after them while I go for this on-site visit. It's really important that we do that. And then finally, this is one of the most important aspects. Optimize, manually tracking and updating. One of the key things I hear from sponsors very often, and it's quite typical globally, is our CRO may handle this work. The key thing I want to outline here is the IP of this drug, the treatment to potential patients is owned by the pharma company. It's the sponsor's responsibility to get this drug to patients. Waiting for a weekly or bi-weekly catch-up call with the CRO is not the ultimate way to be on top of where the challenges are happening in our recruitment process. So what we provide throughout all of these campaigns is the ability for you to see where are we seeing build-up of patients at specific clinical trial sites. which types of campaigns? Is it HCP campaigns? Is it patient campaigns? Where are we seeing patients coming from? So that you can leverage those insights. If it's a phase 2 study, you can leverage those insights on your phase 3 study. So if you see that one site's not very good at booking appointments with patients, maybe they don't go into your site list for phase 3. And it's all about, the key thing here is sponsors owning that data in a compliant manner so that they can utilize it on future studies. The next section, we're going to talk about specifically some case studies that we could deliver. And I think Steve's going to run through this section and talk about specifically how we delivered a HCP campaign, and that will come back to me for a patient campaign. So Steve, I'll throw it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Morgan. I'd like to talk for a couple of minutes about a very exciting study that was done in Europe, in particular was done in Germany. Everyone knows that phase 2 studies, especially in cystic fibrosis, are very, very difficult to recruit for. Because cystic fibrosis being a very rare disease, the sponsor was faced with the challenge of how do I find these patients to complete the study? So basically what they needed to find pulmonologists in Germany, and they needed to set up referral centers for active sites within 60 days, a very short time frame. But then that challenge was compounded with the fact that there are only 15 patients in Germany diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. Then this was during COVID. Everyone knows the challenges we faced with COVID. And then we had the geographical limitations because there were only 2 active sites by the sponsor at that time. And the spin-up time really made the problem worse because we were in the situation where they needed many, many more sites. And those 2 sites happened to be in Essen and Frankfurt. And then how do we investigate, or how do we actually identify the additional investigators? So this study potentially could have failed because they couldn't find the patients. So with our next slide, Morgan, I will tell you what we did through our particular service offerings is, number one, we were able to target those healthcare providers through our very unique outreach process. And we launched our recruitment campaign. And here's what happened. We targeted and identified 755 pulmonologists in Germany. And then working through those doctors and through the German Cystic Fibrosis Association to further connect with other physicians, we were able to identify, successfully screen, and enroll 3 out of those 15 patients, which basically helped complete that trial, that study, and it was a success. Based on the idea that we could find these doctors and through these doctors find their patients, especially in this case where it's a very rare disease, being able to reach out and touch those patients whose lives now have been positively changed forever. We've provided them an opportunity with this life-sparing opportunity to live and get through their cystic fibrosis trial successfully. So Morgan, I'll pass it back to you for any further comments.
Yeah, no, thanks, Steve. I think the key thing, and I'll show you our direct-to-patient case study in a second, but I think the key thing is we're trying to show you here how we helped really, really tough studies. So for all of the attendees today, I would definitely think about those studies you've got ongoing at the moment or coming up in the near future. The applicability of these technologies is across the board. I think just to talk about, when I talk about tough studies, this was a hell of a tough study. I'll talk about a direct-to-patient approach we delivered in a congenital hyperinsulinism trial within a pediatric setting. So an extremely rare disease and in pediatrics. And I'm sure we're all aware of the extra compliance requirements from working in the pediatric space. I think the key thing to outline within this campaign is we had to deliver this not just in the US, but all over Europe. And we did so successfully and compliantly. But in regards to the specific challenges this partner came up against was, one, they had challenges in regards to understanding how they could communicate to parents who may have children aligned to this condition. They had done some work with some patient advocacy groups, but the reach of those patient advocacy groups wasn't broad enough to find enough of these rare patients. And the one-to-many approach we'll talk to in a second allowed us to spread that net wider to hopefully find those patients in the environments that exist. They were struggling in regards to understanding who to invest with in regards to recruitment support, because there were many vendors, not just us, looking to work with them. And finally, in regards to, I'm sure I speak to sponsors all the time who says they wish they could spend as much time speaking to their study coordinators as they did speaking to all of the different vendors they have on the clinical trial. They were worried that if they contracted with multiple recruitment vendors, that would mean multiple catch-up calls every week, and it would be a hell of a resource constraint. So Citeline Connect helped to overcome all of those challenges in a couple of ways. So what we first did, and I think key thing to remember is it's an extremely rare condition, is we built a destination for the children's parents to learn about this clinical trial. So we learned this, we developed this website, delivered it in local languages, and implemented the pre-screening technology. Now, what we had within this study, and hopefully this shows the reach of the collective we have, even within a rare condition and trial like a pediatric congenital hyperinsulinism study, we had 9 different partners. You can see them on the screen, all working simultaneously within their own unique approaches to find patients. So you can see Safator there. They used their genetic database to find patients. You can see that Afico, you see CureClick, Rare Patient Voice, delivered educational information on their website to increase awareness of the clinical trial, and Clinical Connection did some advertising. All of these different partners worked simultaneously on that pay-for-performance basis that I mentioned earlier on to raise awareness of this clinical trial. And within this extremely rare condition, we managed to screen 146 patients. 14 of those patients were referred to the closest site, and 2 of them were randomized. And I think in a condition like this, those conversion rates are fantastic. And hopefully you guys can think about your own studies in regards to how could we deploy this in one of our clinical trials. And I think the final bit I'll just talk about, because I did talk about vendor management on the last slide, was all of those different vendors, I imagine, would typically or historically be part of the RFP process to try and support this clinical trial. Through working with Citeline Connect, this organization was able to have all of those different vendors with all of their very differentiated approaches to finding patients through one point of contact and one vendor, and that was Citeline Connect. So instead of having to have 8 or 9 different stakeholder calls, they had one with us, and we managed those relationships with our vendors. Hopefully that was clear for everyone. And I think, Steve, I'll pass back to you just to kind of wrap up and discuss kind of the key takeaways for today, if that's okay.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you, Morgan. You know, one of my scientific heroes, I think, from the past for many, many years is Albert Einstein. And the first time I ever heard this quote, I wondered about that. And I said, does that really make a lot of sense? Well, basically what Albert Einstein said, and I think it's very famous worldwide, is he described the definition of insanity. We all want to stay away from that environment of insanity. And basically what he said was, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. The point being that what we need to do collectively, as a team, collegially, is find that innovative pathway where we can find new inroads to bring the best qualified patients with the best doctors to the cutting edge studies that we're doing to truly provide life-saving and life-sparing solutions to our patients worldwide. And we do that by accelerating that pathway and reducing time and cost. And so basically what we're doing through that process also is ensuring that we're providing a wonderful journey and an experience for the patient, because their experience is critical. The patient needs to feel engaged. They need to feel that they're doing the right thing for themselves, as well as their families and the community, and that they're a part of this strategy and they're a part of that buy-in. And then the sponsors themselves, who we work with very, very closely as a team, a seamless team, can help us spearhead this change and strike a balance between what's innovative, what's reasonable, what's reliable, what works. It's a team effort. We can do it together. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity today to not only speak with this group, but to be part of this esteemed group of colleagues that is here on the cutting edge of providing those new technologies. Morgan?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think the only thing I'd add to that, Steve, is sponsors can, and I think kind of need to be the spearhead for this change.
Absolutely.
We all got into the pharma industry to help patients. And one of the biggest blockers of us helping patients is clinical trial delays due to recruitment. Those innovative solutions we've talked through today are the things that sponsors, and we do have work with lots of sponsors who are doing this, but sponsors need to be the ones that spearhead this change, because at the end of the day, we want to help the patients we're looking to develop a treatment for. And that would be the only thing I'd add to that, Steve. I think now,
Absolutely.
if there are any questions, be more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, both of you, for your presentation. I think it was instructive. Maybe I've got a question. We saw the importance to build up a recruitment strategy. At what stage will you consider it is the best to wonder about doing this for a company to avoid the rescue mode in a way?
Yeah, so I think very often we get brought in rescue mode when it's too late. And you're working against really hard timelines, and implementing something midway through a study is much more challenging. So I think the big thing we're trying to encourage sponsors to do moving forward is build in that patient engagement and recruitment strategy and the technologies you're going to deploy within that strategy during that feasibility process. As soon as that protocol is finalized, as soon as you've got that long list of clinical trial sites or a country list, start thinking, how do we ensure that our clinical trial sites do not max out at 60%, which is the standard process, so 60% of their target number of patients. How do we fill those sites as early as possible so that those delays to timelines and excesses in budget don't happen? I think, yeah, in an ideal world, we should be having these discussions with pharma companies before the start of the study, during that later stage feasibility process. Steve, do you add anything to that?
No, I think that's excellent. I mean, the key thing is good planning and good partnership and good communication. And as a sponsor drives a process, we become a part of that team, a seamless team, and we work together. And you know, the one thing that I learned many years ago in this industry is we don't have competitors. We have partners. We have collaborators. We have colleagues in this industry to help us find that solution that's going to basically leave the world and our patients around us just a little bit better than the way we found them. So back to you, Morgan.
Yeah. Any other questions, Machu?
Yeah, we've got a question on the chat to have a better idea of what will be the price for your services.
The price, was that, Machu?
Idea of the cost.
Yeah, so it really depends on the study, and I'm sure everyone on the call can imagine that. It depends on the therapeutic area, the sorts of technology we deploy. Obviously, today you've seen two types of campaign, a HCP campaign and a patient campaign. It would depend on the inclusion-exclusion criteria and the type of study in regards to the type of campaign we would deploy. So yeah, costs are really hard to provide without obviously understanding the specific requirements of the study. So yeah, apologies, I can't give a direct answer to that. But if anyone would like to find out the cost, do reach out to myself or Steve, and we'd be happy to discuss that offline. I don't know, Steve, you had anything to that?
No, and that's a great answer, Morgan, because the range is so wide. It really is tailored to the study, but we'd be more than happy to have those offline discussions with you. We need to know the type of study, the area, the region, and what those particular challenges are. And then we can craft that pricing specifically to you. So there is no set price. There is pricing based on what your particular need is and then how we're going to scope that solution for you.
Okay. We will permit you to get in touch with Steve and Morgan if necessary.
Yes.
I've got another question from Diana Vetter, which do you think it's also helpful in diseases that are not rare, this kind of services?
Yeah, so I think the key thing, obviously we used 2 rare disease case studies today, just to show you, because we've got some case studies in vaccine campaigns, we've got lots of case studies in oncology, lots of case studies in all over the kind of different therapeutic areas. But I think the key thing is that accrual max out point of 60% happens across therapeutic areas. And introducing your clinical trial sites, whether it's a non-small cell lung cancer study, a atopic dermatitis study, or a congenital hyperinsulinism study, or a cystic fibrosis study, ensuring that your sites have enough patients to hit their individual accrual goal requires you to introduce those sites to new patient pools, irrespective of the disease. And I think one other thing I would add that, because very often sponsors will say, we don't want to overburden our clinical trial sites with too many patients. The key thing for answer to that question is the scheduling technology. We will work closely with your clinical trial sites to understand specifically what bandwidth they have per month to actually onboard patients, to ensure that there's a clear flow in regards to if it's 10 a month or 200 a month, every site's different, that they're not overburdened and they have specific periods where they can do those on-site visits. So yeah, quick answer, no, it isn't just aligned to rare diseases, but really good question. Steve, you maybe add anything to that?
Well, I can give a list of indications that we're currently working on, but they span everything from all the different cancer diseases, multiple myeloma, Hodgkin's lymphoma, PTSD, psoriatic arthritis, renal cell carcinoma, cirrhosis of the liver. So we're across all indications. My team right now is actively engaged in 9 studies across multiple indications between phase 1 and phase 3. So please, if you have any questions about how we can accelerate your trial and create this awareness, we'd be more than happy to have the discussion. I'm available at your convenience. I know Morgan's the same way. You can call me or email me 24/7, and if available, I will certainly be reaching out to you quickly, and we can answer your questions. But great question on the indication. I'm glad that was brought up, because the rare studies are actually a smaller portion of what we do, but we feel it's a very critical portion because of the difficulty of recruiting patients for a rare study and then actually having patients complete. Because remember, it's about completers. We have to get folks to complete. We have to get that data lock, and we have to submit. And we have to make sure that our timeline makes sense, that when we go to that regulatory authority, whether it's FDA or EMA or whoever the case might be, that we're going with a solid case without any complications for quick approval. Go to market, go to market, go to market for the sake of our patients. Morgan?
Yeah. Matthew, any other questions?
Quite in the same way. What Miriam was asking, if the approach was different from an indication to another, if you adapted your...
Good question.
Completely.
Go ahead, Morgan.
Completely. Yeah. And I think the key thing for when we have our discussions with sponsors, we will do a feasibility process internally to actually work out what is the right sort of campaign to deploy. Because there are some studies where maybe you wouldn't go direct to patient, or some studies where maybe patients aren't seeing their physician very often. Maybe they see them once a year, and direct to patient might be the best approach. Or it might be there with their physician every day, and direct to physician might be the approach. So as you mentioned before, on individual studies, we will deploy the right campaign for that study. So it's not to have everything. We'll make recommendations in regards to what we've seen from our experience.
Yeah, and Morgan, I'd like to add to that too, because that's a very, very good question, because we have multiple service offerings and we tailor this package for your specific need. For example, when a part of our group goes out and goes direct to patients, they're going out to people who will then potentially would self-screen, and they're going to put their criteria in, and we need to determine whether they're a good fit for the study. For example, now when we reach out to the healthcare providers, we identify them by diagnosis code, we identify them by their patient, their doctor number, and their specialty, we can actually reach out and touch these doctors who are treating patients within their practice, who know their charts, who know their history, and say, I know this patient will match that inclusion and exclusion criteria for the study, and the rate of successful completion is much higher. But these are all the different tools in our toolkit that we use to tailor a solution for your particular needs. Do you have any comments on that, Morgan?
No, I think that's spot on. I can see a question from Mark Havenand, Matthew, in the chat. I could maybe address that.
If you want to answer to it. So the question to everyone, has Citeline qualified all the recruitment vendor it works with?
So in answer to your question, we've designed our qualification process for recruitment vendors completely on the qualification process we've had to go through when working with a new sponsor. So there's quality assurance work. We go under compliance and data privacy regulatory requirements, and with each of our vendors. So there's an extensive pre-qualification process before a new partner comes on board, because we mirrored what we have to do with sponsors with our vendors, just to ensure that everything's completely compliant and those vendors are working completely in alignment to the ethics committee approvals that obviously this process would have to implement.
Another question from Sami Mezeka. Are you managing the contractual with the seat? Are you contracting them directly, your company and seat participating to the trial?
Sorry, could you say that again, Matthew? Sorry, could you just say that again, Matthew?
Yeah, Sami wanted to know if you manage contract with the site you were approaching.
Yeah. So in regards to, we don't implement any contracts with the individual sites. What we would do is onboard the site so that they can leverage the technology. Because we're supporting the sites to increase their patient pool, we very rarely have to enter into contractual agreements with the clinical trial site. The scope of that clinical trial site's work is usually delivered in the agreement with the CRO. If they have any extra requirements because we're delivering this technology, that would be a discussion they'd have with the CRO. But just to be completely upfront, within the campaigns we've delivered and studies we've worked on, sites are more than happy to have access to patients that they wouldn't have usually had access to. But hopefully that answers your question, Mark.
Maybe two more questions before stopping. Question from Lucy. Is the file for ethics committee, do you need to describe all the potential partner you will use, or it is enough to describe the way you are working?
Yeah, great question. So obviously everything direct to patient and sometimes direct to HCP will be submitted to the ethics committee bodies. What we will describe is the materials, so the website, the outreach mechanisms, whether it's an email template, whether it's a social media post, all of those materials will be submitted to the ethics committee, obviously in local language. But no, we wouldn't outline and we don't have to outline to the ethics committee bodies which vendor will be leveraging this outreach technique. It's just that we're clear that every one of the vendors will be utilizing an outreach technique that we've had pre-approved for that vendor to utilize in outreach. Hopefully that's clear.
And last question from Simon van der Graaf. She was asking if how was the reaction from healthcare professional when you contacted them. She wanted to know if there were a possibility to be annoyed by your interaction.
Steve,
very good. Yes, absolutely. Very good question. This is something that is in the forefront of our thought. We do three things. Number one, we craft a very careful message, and we craft that message so it's going from our clinical experts to the doctor in a scientific format. So when we reach out, we're reaching out to that doctor and saying, we understand that you have a specialty in this area. We have a clinical trial that could be a benefit to you and your patients. And we approach them in a very professional way. The second thing is, part of this process is using the one-on-one discussions with our clinicians and that doctor to have that scientific discussion to determine if they and their patients are a good fit. And then the third thing is we're reinforcing the positive aspect of doing something that's beyond the standard of care for their patient, number one. Number two, they're adding to the body of knowledge. And number three, it's the right thing to do because most people want to do the right thing by their patients. So what we're very careful about is not appearing to be like a spam. It's a professional outreach, and we're very selective of who we reach out to and when, so we don't send too many emails to a group of doctors where they just don't pay attention anymore. So it's a very surgical approach. It's a scientific approach, and it is a personal approach to bring engagements with these doctors and open that dialogue. But very good question. We're always aware of that. Final note, I have a marketing director who is very adept at building the content and understanding the metrics. We're tracking all of our metrics for all of our campaigns to know exactly where we are in the industry with regard to deliverability rate, click-through rate, and then engagement rate. So very good question. And we can discuss that more in detail if you'd like. Morgan?
No, you've hit the nail on the head. The one thing, Matthew, if the guys, I don't know if there's a follow-up email going out, but do attach me and Steve's email address.
Yeah,
just like if anyone just wants to have a better discussion, they can reach out to us directly.
Yeah, we will send all of you the email address of Steve and Morgan. So I guess we are at the end of this webinar. Maybe I'd like to thank you again, Steve and Morgan, for the time and the presentation. It was quite instructive, though. So thanks for this. Of course, we will send to each of you the presentation, the slides, and also the replay will be available soon. If you've got other questions you'd like to ask, feel free to contact Steve and Morgan. And for the rest, I wish you a good end of your day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.